Hello there. I'm Dr. Butch. Welcome to my podcast. Um, my friends, family, and clients have been urging me to do a podcast. I'm a psychotherapist. My doctorate is in clinical mental health, and I have two master's degrees and a bachelor's degree. Um, and I have about 30 years of counseling experience. My background, I was an Army chaplain. Uh, with a Master's of Divinity and training in, uh, well, I already had some training in clinical mental health and neuropsychology. And then I retired from the Army and got my Master's in clinical mental health and my doctorate in clinical mental health. And I've been doing therapy ever since. Um, I really enjoy doing therapy, and I enjoy helping people become the version of their best self, which is really what everybody wants. So, in today's podcast, I want to talk about couples and communication. What is the most common problem that couples have in communication? Well, let me talk about it and let me integrate some brain science into it so that you can understand it better. So, when couples communicate, this your marriage is supposed to be the most intimate relationship of all relationships. And in other words, people feel and should feel that they can be real in these relationships and they can be authentic in these relationships. And because of that, emotions are often in a state of authenticity and rawness, hopefully. Hopefully, there's no manipulation going on. And I can take an episode and talk about how people manipulate one another. Um, but manipulation and control leads to unhappiness for both parties, whereas influence and love makes people feel more connected with each other and intimate. And when I'm talking about intimacy, I'm not necessarily talking about sexual intimacy. What I'm talking about is into me you see. And this is many counselors use that phrase, into me you see. And that's the goal to achieve intimacy, which a lot of your relationship hinges upon. Okay, so when we are in that environment and our emotions are raw, we tend to personalize everything that's being said, which triggers our autonomic nervous system and causes our sympathetic nervous system to increase. When the sympathetic nervous system increases, the only part of your brain that's really working is that dopaminergic part of your brain. And we commonly think of dopamine as the pleasure chemical, but it does much more than that as a neurochemical. But it controls that emotional part of your brain that was formed during your childhood. And so, because of that, we tend to carry on family of origin patterns into our current relationship, which sometimes they're good and a lot of times they're bad, filled with neuroses and anxiety and manipulation and all kinds of things that we don't want in our current relationship. Um, so, in order to communicate effectively, when we personalize things and our sympathetic nervous system engages, it tends to revert to a childhood state and also the fight and flight mechanism of the amygdala response, which is a neuro structure of the brain. When that happens, it shuts off the executive function of the brain and keeps us from being able to really understand and negotiate and strategize and make executive decisions. Because if you are in a marriage, it's very important to understand that you are the executives of your family and you're attempting to provide an environment where children can grow and thrive in a healthy environment. And also, you can make good financial decisions and good everyday decisions so that you can be successful and prosperous at life and create a prosperous environment for people to thrive and grow. So, how do we get out of this state and communicate more effectively? The first thing to realize is when we personalize things, we're generally personalizing things that we shouldn't personalize. For example, let's say your spouse had a difficult day, you had a difficult day, and you both come home to each other frustrated. Okay, that frustration many times gets projected upon the other spouse, and then we personalize all of this anger or all this frustration, and it's not all about you, even though we think it's about us. So, how do we manage that? Well, first of all, when your spouse is upset or frustrated or angry or any emotion that you may be dealing with, take some deep breaths. When we engage deep breathing, it kicks in our parasympathetic nervous system, which is like a brake pedal to your sympathetic nervous system and calms you down and starts the executive function of the brain to operate, which is the serotonergic area of the brain or the part of the brain that's working on serotonin. When the serotonergic part of the brain can function and you can talk calmly and you can talk rationally and you can communicate in a way that is like executives talking. Hey, we got to make some decisions here. We're frustrated about this. We don't like this, but we want to see this happen. When we do that, then we get out of that negative mode, which is a common neural structure in the brain when we talk negative and think negative and get involved in too much negativity. Then those neural structures form and we miss out on positivity and opportunity. But if we can um, slow that down, we can begin to reconnect part of the brain into a more positive orientation and a solution focused orientation and be able to think in a way that's calmer and more logical and rational, not falling into fallacies of logic and manipulation and blame and different things that happen when we often communicate with each other. Okay, so that being said, one of the best ways to comment when your spouse is um, frustrated, I call it the phrase that pays. Here's the phrase that pays, and it's so what I hear you saying is, and then you focus in on the emotion and let your other spouse know that you're actually listening. So what I hear you saying is you're frustrated. You had a difficult day at work, or the traffic was bad, or the children have been disobedient, which we'll talk about some parenting tips later. And I'll bring my wife in on that, who's an expert in this. She's the head of a Montessori school, and they utilize the book and philosophy of love and logic, which is powerful. And then we can say, okay, so what I hear you saying is you're frustrated and you're angry and 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 you're feeling um, you're feeling bad. So when we do that, we're actually listening to the other person. When we listen to the other person, they feel heard. And the power of that is how many times in our daily activities do we actually feel heard? Not much at all. So this is a good way to begin that communication process where you can think like get out of the childhood brain and the emotional brain and get into a more logical setting where we're able to function from a perspective of productivity and solution focus instead of arguments which don't produce any positive results. In fact, they can produce resentment over time and cause each other to have cold emotions toward each other and lose the power of a positive relationship. Okay, that's my tip for today. Please DM me. We do have a sponsor, Navy SEAL STEM Therapy, and I can give you more information about that. If I have my shirt off, you would see a STEM therapy patch on my shoulder that's regrowing my own stem cells, and it's also activating my cellular structure to function right because I have a bad shoulder and one of the ligaments of my bicep torn from trying to work out too hard at my advanced age. All right. Well, I enjoy being with you. Please DM me, and and I'm going to try to add some links here so that the podcast can be more user friendly. And let me know if you have any questions or concepts, and I'll be more than happy to assist you in your journey in becoming the best version of you, having the best relationships, and helping children thrive. Because children can thrive, and it's not necessary to live in a dysfunctional relationship. You can turn any relationship around unless there is severe mental illness involved, which we can talk about that later. Um, and even that, there are some treatments and hope for that. Okay, I hope that you have a great day. From a spiritual perspective, I'd like to add that First John tells us that God is love, and that perfect love drives out fear. The Greek word there is phobia, which is akin to severe anxiety. And how many relationships are held together by anxiety and negativity versus the more positive love that should be the center of a relationship, which is the very nature of God. All right. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed having you watch my podcast today. If you have any further questions, please DM me and let me know.